Sure.
Welcome to the MYS Virtual Hangout. Here's your host, MYS Music Director, Raul Gomez.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. We took a couple of weeks off with our MYS virtual hangouts, and we had our big MYS season finale virtual concert on May 30th. Um, and it's great to be back. I miss doing this. Enjoy talking to all of these amazing people that we have as guests. And I'm especially excited to talk to today's guest, Darrell Grant. Um, the last week was a difficult week, and I feel like we're all collectively in a moment where we are learning a lot. Whatever your circumstances are, whatever your background is, I think it's been a week of very intense learning and caring and supporting each other. And it's been difficult, and we've all experienced this in different ways. Um, all throughout what's happening, though, it's really comforting to know that we have music and the arts to support each other and to give voices uh, to those who have something important to say, and just to be there for one another, you know. And um, one of the things that can bring comfort is to, you know, share about what we love, and to you know, come together, you know, to celebrate those things that we're passionate about. And for that reason, you know, I'm just super excited to talk with Darrell about music, about art, about what we do with our voices as artists and teachers and leaders, you know. So I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. And he's really somebody who doesn't need much of an introduction. You know, he's uh, an amazing jazz pianist, composer, faculty at PSU. He was inducted to the Oregon Jazz Hall of Fame in 2008, and he's recorded all kinds of amazing albums. He spent, you know, time in New York, where he was one of the most sought after jazz pianists. He came to Portland in '97, I believe. We'll confirm this with him. And I had the pleasure of meeting him actually in person for the first time not long ago when we were starting the rehearsal process for Third Angle's Sanctuaries, a jazz chamber opera that was commissioned that was postponed to next year. But enough of that. Let's go ahead and welcome our amazing guest, Darrell Grant. And there you are. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay,
Hey.
and we can hear you and we can see you. Thank you for taking the time to do this.
Oh, I'm so glad to get to hang out with MYS.
All right, I like your T-shirt.
Thank you. Yes, I know.
Shout
We didn't plan this at
Right,
all, did
right.
we?
Shout out to Third Angle. And it's so great to have you, Darrell. And as you know, these hangouts are a place where the MYS community, you know, we all come together and you know, hang out, and we and our students get to learn from, you know, amazing artists from Portland and beyond.
Yeah.
And did I get that right? Did you come here in '97?
I did. I know. It's like, what is that, 23 years ago now. Yeah, that I came here. Back
And
in the 20th century.
right. And you very recently had a birthday, didn't you?
May 30th, the day that you were doing your big final concert. That was my birthday, yeah.
Happy belated birthday. It was a big
Thank
one, yes.
Well, I mean, you know, big, small. It was 58, so that was kind of big.
Okay.
But
And so there's so many things I want to ask you about. But let's just start here, since we're talking about you coming to Portland in '97. Before that, you were in New York, and you were there for
was.
quite some time, right? How long were you in New York before coming
I
here?
lived in New York for 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And clearly you were very busy. You were playing, you were recording, you were writing, and collaborating with, you know, anybody who's anybody in the New York jazz scene. What were you looking for when you came to Portland?
Hmm. Well, you know, like probably like you and like many of your students, you know, I had this vision of what it meant to be a professional musician. And for me, playing jazz, you know, that included sort of living at the epicenter of jazz in the world, really. I mean, you know, I think you could argue that New York was that. It was certainly the center of the jazz industry in the United States,
Sure.
and also, you know, this sort of legendary city. So it is really true that, you know, that song says, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. So I feel like in my 20s, getting out of college, I had something to prove to myself. It's like, well, can I do this? Can I be in this music at the highest level, at the biggest stage? And so a friend of mine, who's a visual artist, she has a great way of saying this when she talked about her career, and she did the same. She moved to New York. She said, you move to the place where you can have the conversations that you want to be a part of. You figure out what conversations you want to take part of. And for me, you know, New York was where the conversations were. That was where the amazing musicians were. And so having done that and sort of living in that, I sort of came to this moment of like, okay, so I did that now. Do I want to keep doing it? Or, you know, I've had a chance to see what a lot of this is like. I've had a chance to realize some dreams, but also a chance to have a lot of illusions dispelled. A lot of things that I thought might be true weren't necessarily true. And a lot of things that I thought might be my path turned out not to be that interesting to me. And so, came time to sort of look for a place to the next sort of pursue the next part of my path. And I wanted to be able to have an impact in a place where I lived. And the challenge with being in New York, in a city like New York, is it's almost like one of those things like sharks have to keep swimming. You have to keep touring in order to make money. You can't make money in New York. If you're sort of in the scene, then you have to be on the road. Well, when you start thinking about having a family and, you start thinking about making those kind of community connections, really tough to do that in a city as expensive as New York. So I really came to Portland kind of looking for an opportunity to build community in a way that I didn't think was possible for me in New York City.
And how was it once you came here is that what you found? Were there any unexpected elements that you found here when it comes to community and building and connecting?
Well, the cool thing about Portland is, is also one of the challenging things about Portland is that it's a city that feels like a small town. So I remember the first thing that really impressed me when I came to Portland is that, so in New York, there were all these different music scenes, and even different jazz scenes, like the Brooklyn scene and the downtown New York scene and then the uptown scene and the Harlem scene. And so you sort of found your niche and you played in that. And so I came to Portland and it was like, this place is way too small to have a scene. So I would see bands where people who in New York would never be playing together. It's like, no, that person would have been way out here. But because they were in this small city, it was like, they had to find a way to come together. And what they created together was so exciting. And I was like, I loved that about Portland, this way of, sort of bringing people together. The challenge, of course, is that, Portland is a small town. And so to have the opportunities to expand and grow that individuals might want can be somewhat difficult in this town. So I think I found both of those things. But the other thing that was so interesting to me is that, in Portland, everybody's accessible. I mean, the thing about like 6 degrees of separation, and in Portland is like 3 degrees of separation. And so I remember when Vera Katz was the mayor, and she'd just come to my gig. She'd just like sit there with a couple people at a table, and I could go over and I could say, "Oh, how you doing, Ms. Mayor?" And I could just say, "Well, what do you think about this?" And I would never have met the mayor of New York, and I would never have been able to just walk up to his table and say, "Well, so what do you think about such and such?" So there's that kind of cool thing about Portland, that sort of access that you have in this town. So.
And you came here having gotten the PSU job, right? Or
I did. It's just a total. It was a total stroke of fate, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did. I mean, I visited here. I visited my friend Alan Jones in '96, and my then fiance, or now wife, we really liked it. But I was like, can't really see how I could relocate from New York to Portland, Oregon. How's that going to work? Like touring out of to Europe out of Oregon. So, but anyway, then the job just kind of fell out of the sky at me, and that became the opportunity.
And were you already interested in education and jazz education when that happened?
I had done master classes and clinics, but I had never sort of entertained the idea of being a full-time educator. I mean, it was sort of like, I wanted to be a jazz musician. That's what I studied for, and that's what I did, and make records and tour. But after having done that, I saw, well, that lifestyle is not necessarily sustainable. I mean, it's a challenge. If you want to stay in one place, you need some other type of platform. So I enjoyed teaching, but when I got out of grad school, I was like, I am never setting foot in a school. People have been telling me what to learn for 20 years. I'm done. So to get as far away from school as I could.
But I would love to ask you more about your teaching and how your approach to teaching has evolved over the years since you've been at PSU. But before we do that, I would love to reveal your two truths and a lie statements that you
Okay.
sent us that we this sort of game
All right.
that we play on this show where
Yeah.
for those of you who are watching who are not familiar with this, our guests share three statements with us. Two of them are truths and one of them is a lie. So I'm going to ask Darrell to reveal or to share each one of these statements with our viewers, and your job, if you're watching, is to vote on the comments for which of the statements you believe is a lie. So we're going to do that right now, then we're going to talk a little bit more about your teaching, and then we'll come back to this. So
Cool.
do you have your statements?
I have my three statements here.
Excellent. So
So I
let's
should
hear
just read them all neutrally? Or okay.
Yes, exactly. Let's
Okay.
Statement A.
Statement A. I used to have dreadlocks, and my father cut my dreadlocks off in my sleep.
Okay, very good. Statement B.
Statement B. In grade school, I got paid for practicing 50 cents an hour instead of getting an allowance.
Okay, and statement C.
Statement C. I played piano at Donald Trump's birthday party.
Okay, so those are now up on the screen, all three statements. So if you're watching, go ahead and...
If you're still watching, after my last statement.
if you're still watching, then go ahead and cast your vote, A, B, or C, for which statement you believe is a lie. And we're going to leave this up on the screen while we continue chatting for a little bit longer. So let's talk about your teaching. So you came into this position at PSU, and you've taught before some. What was your approach to teaching jazz initially, and how has that changed over time?
Well, so my musical education was probably pretty typical and maybe consistent with what your students have. I studied classical piano from the time I was 7 until I was 18. I did the Music Teachers Association competitions. I played in jazz band in grade school, junior high school, and then auditioned for and got into the Eastman School of Music and majored in classical piano at Eastman School of Music. And then finished that and went to the University of Miami, which is a wonderful music school as well, and did a master's in jazz. So my trajectory was very much as a professional musician, and I had the benefit of studying at, some of the best schools for what I did. So when I came to Portland, I sort of and then I lived in New York for 10 years, like sort of playing in the profession. So I came to Portland State thinking, okay, everybody here has had my experience. Everybody here wants the same thing I want. They want to just be like the most amazing performing musician they can possibly be. They are absolutely willing to practice 6 to 10 hours a day and sort of move their lives solely in that direction. What I found here was that, first of all, places are different, right? I came from New York, and so everybody was very, that's a very professionally driven city, whereas Portland is very much of a quality of life city. And so I am not even going to pretend that I had anything like a balanced or even sustainable life in New York in terms of how my life worked. So I think I was really ambitious when I came, and ambitious for my students and ambitious for sort of what I thought they would do. And I think what I thought I was doing was teaching performance. And what I came to realize is that I was passing on the sort of culture and values and processes of jazz music. Like that's what I had the benefit of absorbing those from the people who created them, from the masters of the tradition. But I also feel like I got the same thing in studying classical. It's like that, it was a different, but it was the idea of like mining a tradition and sort of understanding that the human content of these pieces that we were playing, whether it's Chopin or Beethoven or Brahms or reggae music or jazz music, it's like this is a human endeavor. And so I came to understand that I'm really passing on this tradition and these values, and it's more of a framework for people, through which people to understand and discover themselves, and they will discover things about themselves in terms of discipline. They will discover things about themselves in terms of passion, in terms of all kinds of things like that. But that's really what I feel like I'm doing. And I think my goal is much less to have people be professional musicians, unless that is exactly what they want to do. But absolutely for them to nurture their love of music and sustain it, figure out a way to sustain their art through their entire lives. Like that's my goal. So I think that, and that was very different from what I thought I was supposed to do when I came here.
How long did it take you to sort of arrive there? And do you feel like you're still
Oh, I'm still
changing, evolving?
sure. I mean, uh, I think it took. I guess I can't really remember because it was definitely a gradual process. And I mean, I'm fortunate. I've had some phenomenal students. I mean, some amazing students who, as far as being able to play the instrument, and sort of, um, I've overseen their growth, and they have continued the path into professional musicianship here in Portland and beyond. So that's been really satisfying as well. But I guess I think it was a gradual expansion, and it's still expanding. I mean, the events that are happening now are, with COVID and everything, are forcing us as artists to really rethink what is our purpose in the world. I mean, yes, a lot of our purpose is using the tools of our craft and our instruments, but what happens when there's nowhere to play our instruments? What happens when we can't actually be in the room with people to play our instruments? What else has this training and this sort of following this path of art, what has it taught us that can be of value to human beings?
Mm. Yes, I mean, we're all sort of being forced to change very quickly right now in the way we present our art.
Right.
And for students currently, I feel like regardless of whether they plan to be professional musicians, like you're saying, all of these quick changes put into perspective the role of music in their lives, right? And like you're saying, how to, connect with people, how to deliver that product to people in ways that we, I mean, up until now, I mean, what is normal now? I don't know if we can answer that question, right?
Sure.
But we're all kind of being forced to open our minds and our ears and our eyes and just find and just search, right? Search, and keep searching. Now you've been generous enough and kind enough to agree to play a couple of pieces for us on the piano.
Right.
So why don't we do that now, and then we'll come back to your two truths and a lie, and we'll talk a little bit more. So if you wouldn't mind introducing the two pieces.
Sure. Well, I'm going to say that this is the first live online playing that I've done.
Hey.
So this is kind of a debut for me. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about this is that, we sort of, what normal was for us as performers is there's a certain framework of expectations that it's like, okay, our sound is going to be pristine and our attire is going to be, it's like what performing meant. And it's been really liberating, I think, to see that sort of shaken up and shifted. So I'm in my house. This is my grand piano that you can see here, my Yamaha. And so I've never played on this. I've never had a concert on this piano. This is like, I don't, and so it's just interesting. So anyway, the first piece I'm going to play is a piece that I actually learned from this drummer friend of mine, Alan Jones. He played it with his sextet, and it's an old Duke Ellington tune from the 20s, and it's called Dancers in Love. And the reason I picked it is because I was thinking about how, these sort of commonalities, which we're talking so much about in our country, about divisions and, what we have in common. And I was thinking about how this piece really reminds me of Mozart, because it's very classical in its form. It's very episodic, A, B, A, recapitulation, modulation. And so I was just thinking about this, how Ellington and Mozart have this in common. So it's a little dance piece called Dancers in Love. I don't actually know how I'm going to do it, but it's kind of weird because I'm just like, here we go.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, that was weird.
Very nice.
Uh,
I can hear what you're saying about Mozart, and I like it's reminds me a little bit of like Turkish march type like texture,
exactly,
like
right?
playfulness.
Yeah,
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 very cool.
yeah. And then the second short thing I was play is I do. I used to. I grew up playing for my mother, who was a singer, and so I definitely developed a love of African American spirituals. And so one of the things that we do as jazz musicians is that we sort of try and um, master harmony and the alternative possibilities of harmony.
Sure.
So this is just a little reharmonization of a spiritual called "We Shall Overcome."
Okay.
And I'm going to try and take one headphone off, like in the studio, so I
Sure.
can hear myself. Sorry, could you close the door, please? Calm down.
I love it. It's so this is reality. This is
Yeah,
it's real.
I'm going to start that again.
Very nice. Put your hands together for Darrell Grant, everybody. We do
Wow.
emoji applause in the YouTube live comments. Thank you for sharing those two pieces with us.
Sure.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Let's okay. So there are a couple of things I want to talk about now. One of them is I would like to know more about your very early, your beginnings in music. You mentioned that you studied classical piano, you went to Eastman, and all of that. And I also want to talk about your work as a composer. And why don't we start with your childhood and your so you grew up in a musical family, yes?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. My mother studied piano growing up and played piano and sang in church choirs and things. And so we moved when I was 4 years old. We moved from Pittsburgh, where I was born, to Denver, Colorado. And so, like many families, my family bought a piano, and along with the piano, we got lessons. And I had my heart set on being a drummer. I totally wanted to be a drummer.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
I'm serious. This is literally true. So we were in the piano store, and my mom sits down and plays this piece, and the store owner looks at me and he goes, "Wouldn't you like to be able to play like that?" And I'm like, everybody's staring at me. So I was like, yes. And so then that was that. Piano was my instrument. So I started studying piano at 7, and I studied classical. Had a really, really wonderful teacher. Was very, very fortunate, named William Seibel in Denver, and just kind of I took to it. I was very musical. I loved music from an early age. My parents just said I always had a toy piano I used to pick stuff out on. So they kind of thought that I had some interests. I was listening to records and things like that. And so that was it. Studying classical piano, and then when I was fortunate to have a good jazz band when I was in 4th grade, started playing in the jazz band and kind of introduced to a different sort of way of playing and thinking about music.
So this happened at school. Your introduction.
Yes,
to
at
jazz.
school we had a jazz band in our school, after school jazz band. And a really wonderful band director who was a baritone saxophone player, had a band for like 3 schools in the neighborhood, and we'd all go like one of the schools after school, and he rehearsed. We played little concerts, and so I had, that was sort of some of my first ensemble experience, and I so enjoyed it.
Kids with others, 3 schools?
Yeah, 3 schools.
So coming together to jam, basically.
Yeah, well, play charts and play big. And he was a big band guy, this band director. So elementary school music teacher actually, but really loved jazz. So.
Do you remember any live performances that you witnessed as a kid or as a teenager that were really sort of impactful or meaningful to this, that you can remember to this day?
I can't. I mean, so I think the thing so what they would do in grade school in order they'd have a band day.
Okay.
And so they would bring the concert band from the high school, and they brought the Denver University College Jazz Band. So all these are happening in our elementary school, and then you get to pick an instrument after that. So I still remember that day. I still remember that concert, hearing all those bands. It was just this amazing, amazing thing. I mean, it's funny. You would think that I would remember a lot of concerts, but I don't really remember that from growing up, because I was doing so much music. Like I was playing in in bands, and my family had a little radio broadcast we would do, like a 10-minute religious radio broadcast. So I played that. We used to do concerts in nursing homes. I did talent shows. So there was so much music that I was getting. But what I do remember is that wanting to be a jazz musician and not having, like, there was no YouTube, right? So if I wanted to hear jazz, I would hear it at a park concert, or when I was 16, I would get in the car. I would drive from Lakewood down like 10 miles into Denver, and I'd go to this jazz club, and it's just called Bentley's at the BBC. But I was too young to get in, so literally I would stand out in the hall by the cigarette machine looking at the music. I mean, that was like, I wanted so badly to play the music, that's what I had to do to hear it. So that's what I would do.
Were there any albums in your teenage years that you?
Too many to count. I mean, the first jazz album that I really remember was Horace Silver's Finger Poppin', which was like a 1957 great record with Horace Silver Quintet. And I just wore that out. That was some of the first, because I mean, I heard all kinds of pop music, Stevie Wonder, and I loved all that stuff.
Yeah.
But when I heard that, I was like, I remember running upstairs to my mom. It's like, you got to hear this. You got to hear this. This is amazing, And that was after having already played, like been studying Bach and Beethoven and Haydn and all that stuff. But this just
Horace Silver.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And well, let me read a quote that I found that Horace Silver said, and it is the following. Speaking of, I mean, this is so cool. Horace Silver said, "Darrell Grant is a musician worthy of some serious listening. He is a very fine pianist and composer."
Yeah, that is true. I did have that in my pocket for a while.
How incredible is that to have this person, I mean, a legend and somebody that you looked up to since you were a young boy to say that. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Cool. It is cool. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so I want to talk about your work as a composer, but before we do that, we should go back to your two truths and a lie.
Okay.
And I think it's time to reveal here the truth or the lie. So we do have a few votes in the comments. If you're watching, so I just put the comments back on the statements back on the screen. So we have 3 statements. One of these is a lie. So if you're watching, go ahead and vote for which one you believe is the lie. I'm going to read them out loud just to also give folks a few more seconds to vote if you want to vote. Statement A, Darrell used to have dreadlocks and his father cut his dreadlocks off in his sleep. Statement B, Darrell in grade school got paid 50 cents an hour for practicing instead of getting an allowance. And statement C, Darrell played piano at Donald Trump's birthday party. Okay, so you have a few more seconds to vote. Darrell, let's go ahead and reveal one of your truths.
Of my truths. Statement B is true. That my parents, in order to incentivize me for the kind of practicing they were hoping I was doing, said they would pay me 50 cents an hour, and I had a little chart that I had to write down my practicing. So I was practicing about 3 or 4 hours a day, like 10, 11, 12.
That's I mean, it worked, yeah.
Well, I don't know. I'm as a parent, I'm not sure I would pursue that mercenary strategy to embed the love of music, but it was cool for me. It was like, now I have like 50 cents an hour. That's so cheap.
You should have negotiated.
I should have.
You have a son, yes?
I do.
Yeah. Does he play any musical instruments?
He does a lot. He started playing drums when he was 2. Okay. Since I didn't get to.
Okay. All right.
And but he plays. He studied piano. He plays cello. Plays bass. And most recently now he's moved into musical theater. So he's doing a lot of dancing. And then writing beats, doing like electronic music. Logic Audio. He's run circles around me with that.
Very cool. Okay, yeah. And I guess being home, hopefully he has even more time to do stuff like that.
He does do quite a lot of those things.
So it doesn't sound like you need to like do a lot of convincing for him to do that.
Well, it's funny, I mean, obviously, as a musician, what you got, sort of how you were incentivized around music, and so I was always been very leery about getting in his way because I felt like. I feel like it's, you really want music to be chosen, and you want it to be like, you wanted somebody to be drawn to it, not pushed into it. And I feel like I was lucky that I was pushed into it and I happened to like it, but I was like, so I try and stay hands off with him. But,
cool. Well, it's working.
So far. Yeah.
Okay. Let's go ahead and reveal your second truth. So we're down to 2 statements. So if folks, if you voted B, you were wrong, but you get to change your vote if you want. So we're down to statement A, dreadlocks, or statement C, Donald Trump's birthday party. So which is the true statement?
The true statement is that somewhere in the early 90s, I was working for a musical artist named Clint Holmes in New York City. And he got a call that we were all going to go on a bus out to New Jersey and play Donald Trump's birthday party at the Trump Tower. And I played for him, and I played for LaToya Jackson. And yes, I was at Trump Tower for Donald Trump's birthday and played.
Wow, early 90s.
Early 90s, yeah. Little did I know.
Yeah. Did you interact with him at all?
I did not. I saw him at some log table with
Far
people, and I think LaToya Jackson was at the table with him too. But
yeah.
So,
wow.
No. Yeah.
Crazy world, right? I mean,
you know it.
It's like I mean, of course, we all know that there are very real problems right now that that we're experiencing. But just that aside for just a moment, it's crazy to think that this person, businessman, 90s New York, it's now in this position, and it's just weird.
It's kind of too weird to really get your mind around. It is.
It's stranger than fiction. And well, there you have it. So statement C is true.
Yes, it is. And although my father threatened to cut my dreadlocks off in my sleep, he never actually did it.
When did you make that decision to?
When I moved here, actually, I had dreads for about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. They were long. If you see my early album covers.
Yeah.
Also, but when I moved here, it's like it's going gray. It's like receding. I was like, I didn't want to have like half a head of dreadlocks. I'm done. So shaved them all off. Been bald ever since. Shaved ever since.
Yeah. Well, it kind of makes sense. It's such a big change. Moving from New York to Portland, and it's like starting over or something. It's like. Yeah. Okay. Well, okay. There you have it, folks. So if you voted A, and somebody did vote A, you are correct. That is a lie. So I'm just gonna mark it here as the lie. Okay. Very good. So let's move on now, Darrell, and let's talk about your work as a composer. When Horace Silver wrote that quote, he mentioned you as a composer as well. So have you always been writing music, or is that something you came into at a later point? How did you how did this aspect of your artistry come into being?
Well, I think because I played jazz from such a young age, this idea of ad-libbing or making stuff up was just a part of music. So there was never a sense that I couldn't do that, right? Like that somehow I was only going to play music that, was written, even though I studied classical music. So I'd always had that. And I remember, so growing up where I grew up in Denver, Colorado, it's a very different, like a lot of the music you would hear was original music. And so when I would go out to clubs and hear bands, even jazz groups, instrumental jazz groups would be playing their own music. Like they weren't playing standards I didn't hear that until I came to the East Coast, and people were like, do you know this tune? Well, yeah, I do, but why are we playing that? Why aren't we playing our own music? And I didn't realize that was part of the culture that I grew up in. So for me, as a young person, it's like, I thought that's what you did. You get some cool people, you write some music, and you go out and play it. And so that's what I started doing. And as I started learning jazz, I started transcribing, and I was like, hey, this stuff is simple. It's like so easy. Like, it's not like, it's not like Sonata Form or like Bartok or Hindemith or something. It's like, I could write this. And that thought, I could write this, was really what started me off on the composing. Like, well, okay, so I will. I'm just going to write my own songs. And I think, that involved, as a jazz artist, that's part of what you're sort of writing for your ensembles. I think it really changed for me when around 2009, I discovered some composers that were from Norway. It was a sort of moment where Norwegian jazz sort of came into vogue, And I remember thinking, wow, I'm kind of more interested in writing longer form things. I'd like to write, rather than short forms, 32 bars or song forms, like what would it be like to write some through composed music? And so, started off like many composers writing some suites, and then sort of gradually moved into that. And so I feel now, obviously with the opera, that's the most music. That's like probably more music than anything I've ever written put together. 75, 80 minutes of through composed music. Like I've never done anything like that before. But so yeah, it feels good to sort of be more of a composer. I think it suits my temperament.
And will you share about that, the opera sanctuaries, for folks who are watching and maybe are not familiar with the project or Third Angle? Will you give us an overview of that commission and what the work
Sure.
means to you also as
Sure.
a composer?
Well, I think we started having conversations maybe in 2017, Third Angle, about I had written a piece called The Territory, and they were sort of interested in sort of collaborating with me. What would I like to write? And I was like, yeah, I like writing pieces about something, right? Based around a theme or an idea. And so, but I don't know how it came up in the conversation. So we said, well, we talked about writing something having to do with housing discrimination and sort of redlining. It was a moment where people were becoming aware in Portland. They were doing research into their properties and sort of coming aware that there were deeds on these properties that had these exclusions, that like the actual original deeds to the homes that they owned in Northeast Portland or Southeast Portland said on the original deed, no Chinese can live here, no African Americans live here. People were really shocked. They didn't recognize that this sort of racism had been codified into sort of real estate codes. And so we started talking about that idea, and I got really interested in that and sort of looking at, in particular, the Black community in Albina, which because of that discrimination, when the Vanport floods happened, African Americans were only allowed to live in this one section of town. And so sort of, and then, obviously with gentrification and the way things have changed, they are then now being pushed out of that neighborhood. And I thought that seemed like a really good topic for a piece. And somebody introduced the idea of writing a chamber opera, at which I, just kind of scoffed. It's like, well, you did see the word jazz in front of my name, right? I'm a jazz composer. And, but the more I thought about it, the more I really said, wait a minute, what is it? Why am I saying I can't do this? Why am I not allowing myself to? So I started doing some research into opera and listening and thinking about what is it about this genre, about this art form that makes me feel as a composer, as an author, that my story can't be told through this lens. And so yeah, I think I would like to do it. I'd like to find a way that I could bring, my experience as an African American man, my experience as a jazz musician, and the musics that I know, which includes, classical music, chamber music, vernacular, jazz, soul, pop. I mean, all of those things under the umbrella of opera. And so was fortunate to find some amazing collaborators in Anis Mojgani, our current Oregon Poet Laureate, to write the libretto, and Alexander Gideon, who's a wonderful opera director in Los Angeles. And so we sort of collaborated and bring this together. And Third Angle has shepherded this project from conception to almost completion. Yeah. And then the virus came, so we'll do it again. We'll do it in April, and now we're sort of having to rethink. Well, what does it mean now to do an opera in COVID? Do we have an audience? Do we stream it? Can the performers be in the same room? So many things we don't know. So we're sort of re-exploring it now to see what's going to happen next April.
Yeah, and I will share that I am playing the violin part.
I hope so.
For the performance of this opera. And we had a reading session.
That's right.
Back in, I don't know, what was
January.
it? January.
Yeah.
And that was super fun. And then, of course, all of this happened, and we were not able to rehearse and perform. But I know that I'm very, very much looking forward to doing this in April of next year. How did you arrive at your decisions regarding instrumentation for the piece?
Well, I like writing for mixed ensemble, and I knew that as a chamber opera, I wasn't going to have, full orchestra. So I tried to figure out voices that could bring the elements that I needed. So for the chamber element, like the strings, violin and cello, and then the jazz elements. I needed to have drums, or sort of percussive, and also for the sort of African influenced, vernacular influence, and then jazz instrumentation. So woodwinds, brass, so trumpet, plus flugelhorn. And so I tried to find a nice mix that would give me a chance to be a bit orchestral, but also to go in the various directions that the piece needed to go.
And how do you even start? You're talking about an 80-minute piece of music. It's
right.
a gigantic endeavor. So from a musical content perspective, like, how do you start laying the groundwork? Do you like find themes, like how
First thing you do is you go to the library, you get a book about writing opera. No, actually that's not totally far from the truth. I started reading, and in my reading I started reading about William Grant Still, the composer William Grant Still, who wrote 8 operas, only one of which was, I think, performed. But I he was somebody who very much had a passion for opera, and was also a classical composer, was also African American. So I started reading about his process, and then I started reading about Mahler's process, and I started reading about, and it's like, okay, well, so you're right. I mean, what part of it is sort of coming up with themes and ideas, listening to music, sort of finding, looking at texts, I mean, coming with a plot. I mean, it's a lot. I mean, I had to come up with a plot summary, first of all, and characters, so that I could give those to the librettist to give him some idea of what I was thinking about doing, And so as I came up with characters, I realized, oh, what instruments would go with these characters? What kind of things would these characters be saying? What kind of musical components do I want to draw in? I know that I want to have walking bass. I know that I want to have some New Orleans, sort of soprano saxophone. I know that I want, what I mean? So these sort of, and so a lot of voice memos on the phone, hundreds of voice memos on the phone, of just saying stuff and ideas, and writing them out, and note cards. So yeah, it's an interesting process to come from scratch, but so liberating, right? Because it's like, who can tell you no? Like, you just like, so it's fun.
It's just it's so gigantic. And then, I mean, did you just one day you went like, okay, it's done, and
no, see, that is a fiction. That's what I've discovered, right? Because it's not like that, right? It's like rehearsals happening. Tear it from your hands, hear it, and then be like, thank you very much, everyone, go away. And then, so that was in November. I did a piano rehearsal with the singers, and I was like, okay, cool. And then 2 months of writing and revisions, and and then get the score together. And then we had that rehearsal in January, and then it was another month of, wow, gotta fix this. Oh, that didn't work. And what's been really liberating for me as a composer is reading about the fact that what I thought was this finished process, most of my favorite composers never got there. Even after the piece was published, they're like revising. They're like, gotta fix this. It's like, oh, you don't have to let it go. You sort of let it go in stages, but you can always keep revisiting and repairing. And so that's been really liberating, not having to be like, I'll never touch that again.
Yeah. Well, and I guess, whenever we finally get to rehearse and perform this, it might, some version of that might happen again.
In rehearsals, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. It's like that, changes, and all the way up till performance, I'm told.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I was just talking to somebody who was sharing about how with Beethoven's Violin Concerto, like when that piece was premiered, basically, I mean, they said like, the ink was still like fresh on the pages, but it's that sort of like you're working up to the last minute.
Up to the last minute.
And then you have a performance, and then it might change again. I mean, and when we do this in April, and after whatever like post, like, performance changes happen, I hope that, this can be published, and that the piece will take a life of its own, and
right,
and
well,
take off. Yeah.
Well, I like to think about the illustration. I like to think about is Hamilton, right? I mean, Hamilton started with an idea that Lin-Manuel Miranda had, right? And he sort of created a sketch, and then you got some of the people that are in the final cast, and they sort of worked it uptown, and then they did it at the public theater, with a version, and then sort of, and all this time it's being refined, it's being cut, it's being, sort of, and he had this, Lin-Manuel had this thing that he said in this American Express commercial one time I remember watching. He's like, never be satisfied with your first draft. Never be satisfied with your 10th draft. And I was like, okay, that's something I can use as advice. Like, constantly keep trying to be in process to keep refining. So yeah, first performance is great. And then we fix it and we improve it for the second. And then we fix it and improve it for the next thing. So, yeah.
Well, and risking being a little cheesy here, I mean, isn't that a great way of looking at life and everything we're going through,
It would be a very constructive way of looking at it, right? I mean, because we will fail. We absolutely will fail. We're failing all the time. We're failing every day. And there's no way we can not fail. But if we stop, then we never get to the improvement that the failure is preparing us for. So yeah, constantly fixing and trying and failing and trying again.
And listening and growing and evolving.
Yeah.
So I think that's very, very powerful. And I think it's a very powerful message for young musicians as well, as they look, in front of them and have to make decisions about their future in the midst of such uncertain times.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's so much that we can't predict, right? But I think this idea that you're constantly trying to grow as a person, and you're sort of making decisions about the next step in that growth as best you can, and sort of adjusting as you go. I think that's the thing that we can do.
Yeah, and that we to some extent can control, perhaps. Darrell Grant, when you're not writing operas or playing jazz or teaching, what do you do? What are you into? And that's our next segment, and our second to last segment on this MYS Hangout. So what brings you joy? What are you into outside of music and outside of your work?
Well, I love tennis, and you play tennis?
Yes. And so, okay. Go
okay.
on. We'll come back to this. Okay.
Rafa Nadal. I'm just going to say that.
That's you?
Rafael Nadal is my guy. I don't know who's your guy is, but I'm just putting that out there.
Oh, I thought you were saying that's your level of playing.
Oh, yeah. If that were my level of playing, then we'd probably be hanging out in a different place right now. No, that's my favorite player. He's somebody who I really admire. Isn't it
crazy that he's a righty, but he plays with his left hand?
Yeah. That he's just like, his father said, yeah, you'll be better. Learn to play with your left hand. It's like, okay, fine. I've never done anything that hard in my life. So yeah, I love playing tennis. I haven't played. I mean, obviously they closed the courts, but now that and I actually didn't play while I was writing the opera. I mean, I kind of just like the last year, I just didn't have time. But yeah, I used to play 4 or 5 times a week for 15 years or so. So
I owe it to these MYS Hangouts to have found out 2, I hope, tennis buddies, because I also learned that Adam Eccleston plays tennis.
And, I did not know that.
We agreed that as soon as this whole lockdown thing is over, we're going to play. So hey, now we're one short of
doubles. Yeah, that's true. Well, keep going. You might get to it in the next couple interviews.
I know. Cross my fingers and get a tennis MYS Hangout League.
Well, Lisa Volley, actually, I don't know if I should say this there, but Lisa Volley actually threatened to play me a match of singles for the budget of the opera. Just it's like if I really was insistent on something, we'd have to play for it.
Wow. Okay. I love knowing that about you. It keeps you in shape. I mean, it's good. I used to play with my dad when I lived in Costa Rica, and he has this thing that he knows. He's able to just stand in one place basically, and his technique is such that he's barely moving, and he has me running up and down the court.
I gotta get that. I have to get that. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Like this is true. Like I'm playing my dad, and I'm running back and forth. He's just standing. Then his cell phone rings, and he takes his phone out of his pocket while he's still making me run all over the place. He picks up, it's a client, and he starts talking to a client, and finally wins the point. And he goes and takes the call.
Yeah, that is a metaphor.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question from a viewer, and if you're able to hang out for a couple of extra minutes, Darrell, I would love to forward this question. And this is from our colleague Ryan Marr, who's director of jazz at the Metropolitan Youth Symphony.
Ryan Marr.
So Ryan asks, he says, one of the things that I think makes you a hero, Darrell, is not only your art, but your humanity. As a teacher, how do you deal with teaching the art of artists who are not necessarily good people?
Wow.
That's a big question.
It's a
So I think it's a little bit of like, can you separate the art from the artist, right? I think.
Well, I think, I mean, I don't have an answer. I don't have the right answer to that question, but I think the way that I would think about it is that, you know, in some instances, the art stands on its own, right? I mean, the art has something to teach. And I feel like you don't have to hide from the information about the person. You can share the information about the person, but then the people that you're teaching also, you can give them agency to express themselves. And if they say, you know what, I can't get past this particular information, there are many, many other ways to learn about the information. Like, you don't have to learn about the information through this person. And the other thing is that you can also give them the opportunity to speak to it. Say, well, how would you respond to this? What would you like to say about this? Because I think the challenge is that we as artists oftentimes think that we're definitely supposed to speak through our instruments like that. But I feel like our instruments are only one tool of our expression. And, you know, we can also express ourselves. We express our humanity through all the other things that we do. So, you know, I wouldn't want to force some music down somebody's throat by somebody that they really couldn't respect, but I would offer them the opportunity to respond to it and to use that as fuel to do something better, something different. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is an answer, and a great answer to that question, and it, you know, helps empower, in this case, students to, you know, take ownership and to, you know, have their voice heard about whatever art or artists they're encountering. So thank you, Ryan, for that question. I think that's like a full MYS Hangout worth of things to explore.
Well, we have to, I think as teachers, we have to keep thinking about that, because we don't teach in a vacuum. Like, we teach in the world as it exists. And as we're coming to see that world is inherently unjust. And as we start to recognize that, we have to change our teaching. And there will probably be things that we no longer teach, because the world has moved along past the point where those things are really relevant to the world as it exists now. It may have been relevant, you know, it may have been constructive in the world as it existed 20 years ago, but it's no longer constructive. And I think the willingness to let that go, the willingness to say that we can find something that represents who we are now, more than that, I think we have to be willing to do that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And Darrell, finally, before we have to let you go, our last segment here, the plug. Is there anything that you would like to plug or share that you're up to these days, or you want people to check out?
Well, I guess I would say, you know, I mean, most of the things that I'm doing are future things. I mean, the opera is going to come back in April, but I guess I would say that one of the interesting things that's happening right now is that because art has pretty much stopped all over the world, people are home that are not usually home. People are available. They're not usually available. So a couple of months ago, I did a video, a virtual choir video on a piece of mine from the Ruby Bridges Suite, and put that on my website. And so I'd encourage people to check that out. I've got another project that I can't. It's in progress, but in the next few weeks that'll come out, and people will see that on social media. So and it's sort of, again, celebrating young people. It's celebrating this sort of moment of transition, of graduation, of this in the midst of all this turmoil, that there's still this beautiful young energy that we need to celebrate. So so I guess I don't have anything like that I can think of at the moment to specifically plug, but I'm glad to be doing things. I'm glad to be inspired and connecting, and there will be concerts coming up. There will be live performances coming up, and virtual performances. So look for those.
And your website is darrellgrant.com, right?
That's correct.
And you tweet?
Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Yeah.
And how can we find you on
See,
Twitter?
I should know that. Twitter is Sterling, Sterling1, which I don't use very much. Instagram, mostly it's Facebook. Darrell Grant.
Okay.
Music on Facebook. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so we'll be paying attention. We'll be looking forward to whatever you're going to be up to next.
I'll tag you on
yes.
Tag MYS on
Thank you. And we're big fans of you and your work at MYS, and thank you for taking the time to hang out with us.
Oh man, thank you for asking me. Thanks to everybody that is there that I can't see.
All right. Okay, so we'll see you later. Thank you again, Darrell.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. And thank you all for watching. It's, again, every time we do a hangout, I'm just moved and inspired by these amazing artists here in Portland and beyond. So thank you to Darrell Grant for spending time with us. Thank you all for watching, and check out our upcoming guests. Thursday, Ron Blessinger from 45th Parallel Universe and the Oregon Symphony is going to be our guest. And then next week, we have two amazing guests. On Tuesday, actually, the date is wrong there. Whatever Tuesday is next week, what is that? I guess I should know, but I don't. So I'm just going to look it up and tell you, so there's no room for confusion. So Tuesday, June 16th is Rachel Sokolo's hangout. Why don't I go ahead and fix that right now while you watch? Because right? Why not? So Tuesday, June 16th. There you have it. And Rachel used to work with Schirmer, the music publishing company. I know she works with MKI artists, so she's going to bring a really interesting view, to a part of our industry that many young musicians are not very familiar with. The whole music publishing and artist representation aspect of the industry. And then Thursday, I didn't put the date here. Okay, Thursday, that would be the 18th. Jun Iwasaki, the concertmaster of the Nashville Symphony and former concertmaster of the Oregon Symphony, is going to be our guest. So thank you again for spending time with us. Stay safe and enjoy the summer weather, the rainy and overcast, but it's going to be nice again very soon. So thank you again, and I will see you on Thursday with Ron Blessinger. Take care.